I'll give you a little backstory of our trip to Mexico in 1961. My oldest friend is Chuck Sanft, and I've known him since the second grade, since 1952, when I moved from Georgia to Minnesota. We went to a school called St. Adalbert's in St. Paul. It was located in what's called Frogtown. You know, sort of at that time, you know, sort of a solid Catholic, you know, middle-class community.
I think Ray and I were both, you know, on the right on the edge of middle class, but maybe not quite there.
And about sixth or seventh grade, a boy arrived from Brazil. Real interesting guy. And, you know, of course, his name was Gunther Meisner.
Oh, he came in like when he was in seventh grade, joined us at St. Adalbert's School and graduated with us, you know, the following year, which was like 1959. You know, we got to be friends. He didn't have any friends. He came up from Brazil. And so Ray and I became friends with him.
For me, it was very devastating because in 1958, if you went from Rio to St. Paul, Minnesota, I mean, St. Paul was nothing. You know, we had tall buildings in Rio, you know, we had everything, you know, the carnival, you know, the lifestyle. And then St. Paul, Minnesota, I really disliked because I came in August and there was humid heat. Mosquitoes were really terrible. And because in Brazil we always had the ocean breeze, you know, and we lived kind of higher up in the hills, so we didn't have that oppressiveness. And then, of course, when winter hit, oh my God, I couldn't believe how cold it can get. But I survived it. Yeah. And that's where I met my friends Ray and Chuck. And we became very good friends. And of course, we got into a lot of trouble together, you know. And for some reasons, the nuns always found out about it. And of course, I was the one who took the brunt of the punishment.
He came from Brazil. You know, he was tougher than we are because he knew some, like, jiu-jitsu or something. He said he had to learn that to live on the streets of Sao Paulo or wherever he was in Brazil.
Just a very, very friendly person. My recollection is that, you know, he spoke English with an accent, and that, you know, he was learning English. And he said that he and his family had just moved from Brazil, and that they were originally from Austria. He had an older brother, and, you know, they lived up near the capital, and Chuck and I would visit him, and we would become friends through the years.
I remember that one thing we did is we took our lunch and went to the state capitol, and we snuck into the Supreme Court, and we sat where the Supreme Court judges sat, and we ate our lunch. And one of the kids, I can't remember if it was Ray or Chuck, he says, "I wonder what this button is for." And he pressed the button underneath there, and the next thing you know, the cops started coming in. And of course, they corralled us. And next thing I know, you know, we were summoned in front of Mother Superior. And of course, I was the first one. She says, "Put out your hands." And then she took a ruler, whack, whack, whack. And then one of the times, I just grabbed the ruler, and I broke it, and I dropped it. And she looked at me, and she actually laughed. And she says, "Get out of here."
Yeah, he was looking for company, and I don't know, we helped him out. We found him interesting at the time, you know. I think, yeah, he was anxious to have some friends, and we were kind of interested in knowing him, so that's kind of how it went. And Gunther was a little older than us, because he had lost a year or something, so...
So yeah. But anyway, Ray and Chuck and I, you know, were very, very good friends. Like I said, when kids get into trouble together, you know, they kind of bond. And then My dad got a job and my brother got a job in Chicago, and they moved to Chicago with my mother. And I still had about 3 or 4 months left of school. I went to a Hill High School, you know. Maybe Chuck went to the same high school, but I don't think Ray did. I'm not sure. I can't remember that part. And Chuck's parents says, yeah, you can stay with us until you finish the schooling. Slept, ate. We were very close. I mean, you know, as kids, we were extremely close. I mean, we wouldn't have gone together to Mexico if we weren't real close. We must have had something in common, you know.
So we graduated from grade school in 1959. You know, Gunter had been to my home a number of times. In fact, after I finished 8th grade, you know, Gunter had been over. I had bought my first car, and you know, he actually drew a picture of my car, a 1929 Model A. And so, I mean, we had a nice friendship with him. And shortly after that, Gunter moved to Chicago. So, you know, he goes off to high school, and Chuck and I go off to the two boys' Catholic schools here in the Twin Cities. He went to Hill Murray, and I went to a place called Cretin.
And so Ray and I became friends with him. Hung around for a while. We went down to visit him in Chicago.
We were young kids, and Chicago sounded pretty exciting, and we started taking a Greyhound bus, Chuck and I did, and visiting Gunter and staying at his house. And you know, all I remember about his house is that, you know, he lived off of Cicero Avenue, and we would get down there and he would show us where Al Capone had shootouts, and we would ride the L and go to all the museums, and God, we just had a fabulous time. And you know, it was exciting for us, you know, to be in a big city.
We had gone down to visit Gunter a number of times. You know, we went swimming in Lake Michigan, and then the idea come up, and I forget it. I think it might have been Gunter's idea to. His father was buying a new car and was willing to go to Mexico. Did we want to go to Mexico? That summer of '61.
But in 1960, my parents and I took a trip from Chicago to Mexico, and we drove. At that time, we weren't really cognizant of the stretches, you know, how vast this country is. And we look at the map, you know, how long can it take for us to drive to Chicago to Mexico City? You know, no big deal. Well, it was a shock, you know, especially driving through the South, Texas, you know, just driving hour and hour, you know. But we enjoyed the trip. It was a really fun trip. And then in 1961, my dad said, you know, I think I'd like to go back and see the eastern part of Mexico, the Atlantic part. And we invited Ray and Chuck to come with us.
So after we finished our sophomore year, Gunter called us up and said, hey, my dad has bought a new car and we're going to go to Mexico, and would you guys like to come along? You know, we talked to our parents and we said, hey, that would be great, because we both had 2 years of high school Spanish. So we agreed, and you know, Chuck and I had both worked, and I took $125 and Chuck took $100, and that was going to be our money, you know, to get us through Mexico.
We dreamed about having some adventures, and going to Mexico sounded great, but you know, I think back, and you were kind of naive and dumb because you never even read any travel books. But of course, in 1961, there weren't access to a lot of travel books. So that's how it all started. He had a new Chevrolet 4-door, I think it was an Impala. His old man was quite proud of it.
And so we left, I think we left Chicago probably around July 1st of 1961. And Mr. Meisner had purchased a 1961 Chevy Impala, bright red, 2-door. I mean, it was a nice car.
Yeah, my dad had just, well, in 1960, he bought a Chevy Impala, two-door. And the roof was maybe about this much, and the rest was glass, which was okay for Chicago, but not driving through Texas, you know. So they came down by train, and my dad and the three guys got in his car, and we drove to Mexico.
I don't know. I think it was last week in June, maybe. I can't remember actually, but that's when we started, and things went fine for several days. And then, you know, it gradually, well, not even gradually. He just started in one day. I think it was mid-morning. I don't know if he's about, you know, America and the problems, and you know how good Adolf Hitler was.
I mean, he was talking about the extermination of the Jews, that the job should be completed, and you know, it was just so horribly wrong and against all your morality and all your values and everything you've ever learned. But then you realize, my God, you know, you're talking to a Nazi. And so very soon, you know, by the time we got to Texarkana, we knew that the driver, Mr. Meisner, was a Nazi.
Now, according to, you know, Ray and Chuck, you guys split up at one point. You parted ways because of your dad or something?
You know, I don't remember that part.
Because your dad was in the German army at one point.
Yes, yes.
Is that what was, I mean, what was his role in the German army?
He was just a private.
Just a private.
Yeah, yeah.
So
he was taken prisoner in France.
Oh. Okay.
And he spent several years in a prisoner of war camp.
Okay. Was he really proud of that service, or?
Well, when you're fighting in a war like that, you're not fighting for a cause, you're fighting for the guy right next to you. And the way they got caught is they were pinned down in a farmhouse. It was my dad and about 4 or 5 other people, you know, and he was the oldest one because he was already 30 years old. Everybody else was in their early 20s or late teens, and they said they had they were pinned down, and on the ridge every day a Jeep with a 105 recoilless rifle came there and would lobby some shots towards the farmhouse. It was a stone farmhouse, you know. And one of the younger soldiers says, you know, I'm gonna get that guy. And my dad says, no, don't do anything like that, because they're just shooting to keep us busy. So unbeknownst to my dad, the 2 young guys one day took off early during the night and went up the hill, and when the Jeep came by, they whoosh, blew the Jeep up. Well, the next thing you know, these guys were coming in with tanks. And of course, you know, my dad right away says, I need something white, you know, and they gave up. And only my dad and another guy actually survived the bombardment, you know, of the farmhouse, you know. And they put him in a Jeep, and they were driving him somewhere, and then the sergeant stopped, and my dad knew maybe a couple words of English, but the guy told him, you know, get out of the Jeep, and told him, run this way, you know. And my dad said to himself, I don't know. And then his buddy says, Eddie, They didn't want to bother with us. They just want to go back. They just want to let us go. Let's find a unit and. And my dad said, no, I don't think so. And the other guy says, Eddie, I'm leaving. And he ran about 50 yards, and it was a minefield, And I guess the explosion alerted another Jeep with a lieutenant, who came by, and then he asked the sergeant what happened and so forth and so on. Then he asked my dad, and my dad kind of conveyed to him that the guy wanted to escape, that he jumped out of the Jeep and ran away by himself. And the lieutenant says, okay, you come with me. And that's how my dad ended up in the prisoner of war camp in France with the Americans. I mean, my mom had a stack of letters like this, said missing in action, so she didn't know whether he was alive or dead, And then she was kind of surprised one day when he knocked on the door, and he was at our condo. My dad and my brother left for Brazil in 1952, and they went from Austria to Genoa, Italy, and took a boat and went to Rio, and from Rio they went into a smaller town called San Lorenzo. The reason my dad got there is because somebody in Austria told him that there was this mineral water manufacturing establishment in that small town in Brazil that had turn-of-the-century equipment, and the equipment was falling apart, and they didn't have money to buy new equipment, so they figured they'd get somebody who was a tool and die maker to make the parts that they needed to keep operating. And both my dad and my brother were tool and die makers, and that's how they got to Brazil. After a year, they sent for me and my mother, and then we also went, by boat to Brazil, and my dad came to pick us up from Rio and then went to the small town. It was a very small town, and it was totally different than Vienna, Austria, which is pretty prissy, where if you walk in the park, you got to stay on the path. You can't go on the grass or anything like that. Whereas that small town in Brazil was just a fantastic place for somebody who was only, 7.5 years old when he got there. They did have cars and trucks, but most of the traffic was still by horse and carriage. We used to go to the town market and, horse and carriage and, do the shopping. And so it was really an unbelievable, especially for me coming from Vienna. Also, they had a railroad station, which was the end of a cattle drive. They would drive the cattle, from different parts of the interior, and they would actually ride through town with the cattle. And I had a neighbor who said, anytime you want a horse, just pick up a horse, and there are saddles and whatever, and just take off. Just don't abuse the horse. Well, I couldn't lift a saddle. I was still, like I say, too young to lift a saddle. So I always rode bareback. That's how I learned how to ride. And I mean, I could gallop and do whatever, just like almost like an Indian. Amazingly, the drovers, I would meet them outside of town, and they would let me go with them to drive the cattle through town. It was just amazing for them to let a kid on bareback, to help them drive the cattle. So my upbringing in Brazil was just unbelievable. And then after the job was done, my dad moved from one town to another, trying to find work. And we ended up in Rio. My dad worked for a company called Crown Cork, and they made bottle caps. And I just loved living in Rio because the scenery is just unbelievable. The mountains, the ocean, Copacabana, Ipanema, the Sugarloaf, Christ the Redeemer up in the mountains, and where we lived was in between where the poor people lived and where the more middle-class people lived. So I grew up just playing with the local kids there, and they always used to come over and see if I could let them have, my mom's knives, she had a good set of knives which she brought from Austria, and we used that to cut sugar cane and then just chew on it, Oh, yeah. So the people really liked children. I mean, we could run throughout the neighborhood or run to somebody's home and whatever, and nobody would say anything, I remember this one time we were playing tag, and this kid ran into this house. I ran after him, and there was a body laid out on the kitchen table. They were having a vigil, I mean, it scared the daylights out of it, but nobody said anything. And once in a while, two guys would shoot it out on the street, bang, 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 and everybody's standing in the door just watching it. The bullets going by, but Brazil was a totally different country when I lived there. Yeah. You could go out on the street at any time of the night and never be bothered by anyone. We never closed our doors, we never closed our windows, because the thing was, the police they didn't goof around. I remember they would ride into a bar with the horse and just with the billy club, just anybody they encountered, just whack, 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 whack. Yeah. The government was under the military rule, so there was no goofing around.
So you're in this wonderful place, and why did your father decide then to go to,
We wanted to come to the United States before we went to Brazil. But the quotas for people coming to the United States from Europe was already exhausted. I was 14 years old, and I was the one that spoke the most fluent Portuguese of all my family. So all the formalities and embassies and work I did. I was 14 years old when I had to sign a document at the United States Embassy saying that I would never refuse service in any of the United States armed forces. What is a 14-year-old kid, But that was one of the prerequisites to coming to the United States. And here again, my dad came first, and he couldn't find a job as a tool and die maker, but he found a job as a janitor in a funeral home of all places, But anyway, he worked his way then, into working as a tool and die maker. And he finally had enough money so he could send for my mom, my brother, and I. And we flew from Rio to, Caracas, Venezuela, and then from Caracas to New York, and then from New York to Chicago, and then by train from Chicago to St. Paul, Minnesota. I was supposed to have started my second year of high school, but for some reason, I couldn't speak English, but arbitrarily they said, let's put him back into 8th grade. What they did, they sent him in back of the class and said, good luck. But having had so much experience, I had already knowledge in history, in geography, math and so forth, I survived it, yeah. And that's where I met my friends Ray and Chuck.
So can you stop there and just tell me what was it like in 1961? What were your ideas about the world? Or?
Well, I was sort of a social activist back then. John Kennedy had run for president, in 1959. I was a Catholic here. On the other side of the alley was a Lutheran, Bobby Trapp, who's now deceased. And things got so heated, I can remember in 1959 that he challenged me to a fist fight because he was so enraged that the Pope would take control of the United States if John Kennedy won. And I said, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. And so I actually signed up for Kennedy for president, and I went door knocking. And one of the things they gave me, I'll never forget it, they gave me rooftop carriers. They would have Kennedy for president, Kennedy Johnson, and 2 suction cups, and basically it was a board, like a thin board with some straps that you would tighten on top of your car. And to me, it was an exciting time. The civil rights movement was starting to bubble. I was very much pro-civil rights and give the rights to the blacks. And I grew up in the South the first 7 years of my life, Rome, Georgia. And so my grandfather owned a restaurant, and my uncles had shoe shops. And so, I had black friends as a child, and I didn't really see color. I didn't see a color barrier when you have friends like that.
But there was segregation at that time.
Oh, absolutely. I know that when I would ride a bus with my mother or my grandmother in the small city, that blacks would have to go to the back, and they would have to get off the bus if there wasn't room for white people. And when I first realized color as a little boy, I asked my grandmother, I said, why is this little kid, I forget his name now, why is he black? And my grandmother said, well, when God created little Tommy there, he poured too much Mercurochrome on him. And that was her explanation for why black people were black. But growing up in the South, it was only later in my life. Actually, probably about the age of 13 or 14 when I would go back home, that you realize the immense hatred that whites had for blacks. When I came up to Minnesota in 1952, I remember I was terrified because I grew up thinking that Yankees were devils. I was told that. We didn't play Cowboys and Indians in Georgia. We played Johnny Reb, and Johnny Reb always beat the Yankees. So it was a different time. And so then you get up here in 2nd grade, I meet Chuck and my classmates and say, by God, these are not devils. They're okay. They're good guys. So it's that, but when you grow up in it, I know my cousins and my uncles in particular they'd use the N-word, even as an adult. The whole thing with segregation was really a hot button issue. George Wallace was just starting to really pound the table. So I'm up north, I'm a Yankee, I'm a liberal.
And did you think there was hate within your uncles that used the N-word, or no?
There was hate.
There was hate.
It was horrible. I remember on one of our trips, my sister, who was very young, she was probably about 14 or 15, and my uncle had a shoe shop, and had this young boy about 15 years old. He's a black guy. I've known him forever. He started working for my uncle when he was 8, 9 years old, and his name was Crack. They called him Crack because he could shine shoes like nobody else, and then he would crack the rag, and he'd make that rag just sing. And I shined shoes with him at times, like in 5th or 6th grade when I went down there, and he taught me. I could never do it like him. But so here we are, we're down in the South, and Crack comes up to my grandmother's house because apparently he thought my sister was being friendly to him, which she was. She was just being a normal person. Hi, how are you, and this. Well, within an hour of Crack coming to our house, all my cousins came, to my grandmother's house, and they said, what are you doing to us? We have to live in this town. You guys are Yankees. You come down here, and you're just making trouble for us. In fact, we're going to take Crack out, and we're going to tar and feather him, and teach him a lesson. He knows he shouldn't be coming around like this, and talking to my sister. It's horrible. I said, hey, whatever you do, don't do that. I said, Crack is such a good guy. You've known him forever. It was harmless. But they were so angry, and my uncle, who was just, my uncle at the time, my Uncle Romeo, was considered sort of like the real mayor of this town. I mean, he wasn't the mayor, but yet he had a tremendous amount of political power in a small town, and he was just so pissed off. He came up and he gave my mother a tongue lashing, something fierce. It hadn't opened up at all back in those days.
So they were more afraid than angry.
Well, they were afraid of their reputation in the community, that we Yankees were going to humiliate them. Of course, then my sister, it really affected her. I mean, she was crying and all upset, and my mother was all upset because, I mean, it was actually a pretty dramatic event. I mean, my Uncle Romeo was probably, a couple of years older, and by this time my mom had, 5 kids, and you're being yelled at because you said hello to some black boy who had worked for the family for years. Yeah. Yeah, so, Kennedy won the presidency, and, it seems like, the country was really moving forward. It was an exciting time, and, the civil rights movement was ongoing, and, I mean, I knew that, there were freedom marchers and people were going south, but, I was self-supporting. I mean, I worked and put myself through a Catholic school, and...
Well, you were quite young.
I was young, yeah.
Can you remember what, 1961 was like for you? And
No, I can't, actually. I was in Hill High School, which was a Catholic high school. I was working. I was paying something on tuition because we had some hard times because my father had gotten laid off. So I think Ray and I were both, on the right on the edge of middle class, but maybe not quite there.
what did your dad do?
Well, he did a lot of things, but he was mostly he was a machinist, and then he was a foreman, and then he was a manager of the plant. And when he was a foreman, the McGrath brothers, which owned this, and they made stuff for the government. It was right after the war, and they sold the company and moved out, left owing the workers vacation time and all that. A typical crappy way to exit. And so my father had to start over as a machinist, and with 5 kids, it was, my mother managed the money because she was better at it than my dad. And so that's where we were. I mean, when you're 15 and you get there's 5 kids in the household, and you pretty much take care of yourself. You earn your own money, you buy your own clothes, that kind of stuff,
You had a job.
Yeah, I had I had a paper route, and then I got a job at a little ice cream factory in St. Paul called Crescent Creamery. And I got $1.50 an hour. And some of it was janitorial, some of it was, loading trucks. It's hard to describe, but popsicles, futsicles, what they made these specialty items, and they called them novelties. They fit in a long, for packing purposes on a semi, it was like that, and then they had these 2 boxes of like a dozen each. So I made up the carton and put them in there and taped it shut, put it on a conveyor belt. Boring, but it was $1.50 an hour.
Sounds actually pretty good for back then, $1.50 an hour.
It was pretty good, yeah. So anyway.
Did you have family in the war?
Uncles, yeah. My father, no, he was working for this outfit that was making things for the Marines and the Army. But I had uncles, my mother's brothers, a couple of them, and then we had quite a few friends. Our place was kind of a stop-off, because some of them had been in for an extra year or 2. And anyway, they came and stayed at our house, and that's what, I've got a duffel bag at home. They were from the town of Cologne, and that's written on the duffel bag. That's belonged to one of my uncles, and then one of my uncles brought back a German Luger training pistol. It was just a 22, automatic. Just looked like, the TV Luger. They brought back and showed to me anyway.
Your uncle?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but they probably lost friends in that war, or did they?
Yeah, they didn't talk about it at all. None of them. I think that was a way of, staying somewhat in control, I think. But that's just a guess. But they didn't talk about the war. No, nothing like that. So.
Had you encountered any kind of prejudice like that before from people? I mean, like Gunther's father in America or in St. Paul?
No, I don't actually remember. Our neighborhood was not, there were Jewish families in our neighborhood, 3-4 of them. And we lived in houses that were a lot of them were only like 6 feet apart. Big old houses on the edge of Frogtown, and then we had Polacks and Swedes and German. So it's kind of socially integrated with, Catholics and Jewish, and then there was a few Irish people there too. But I never heard of, no slurs against. No, we used to call the guy the rag sheeny, who would come around and, buy rags and old pieces of metal, and lead pipe, and we called him. And then somebody said, "What? What are you calling that guy?" And the rag, that's what we call him, the rag sheeny. Well, sheeny apparently is a derogatory term for Jew, and we never knew that as kids. And he drove this was in the early 50s, he drove a horse and wagon, and it had a big lead plug that he was attached to the halter of the horse and put it on the ground. The horse would wait for him while he went in and made offers to buy whatever people were getting rid of. So anyway, then we didn't call him the rag sheeny anymore. And we didn't know that. And, my mom and dad played cards with the Jewish Tenenholzes, just a couple people up the houses up the block. And nobody said anything, and nobody said anything about not to say sheeny either until this one person, I can't even remember where, I think it was at school. And someone had clued them in that you didn't use the term sheeny. There weren't any blacks. There was one black kid that came to our house to play our piano. That's all I can remember. My mother bought an upright piano for my sister to have piano lessons, and this, what we said, called him, this nice mulatto boy really plays really good ragtime, and he wants to come and use our piano. Is that all right? I suppose we had 10, 15 people, and he came and used it. But that's the only time I remember a black person actually in the neighborhood. They were, across the freeway, and I never heard anyone say anything like, keep anything derogatory. But it's just the way it was, and I never questioned it. But when I think about it, it's a little bit strange, maybe.
So what's the dynamic in the car while you're driving south?
Well, you're young kids, and we hit the road, and my recollection is that it was just a normal trip. Chuck and I are in the back seat. Mr. Gunther, I can always remember looking at Mr. Gunther's head. He had a smaller head, and he combed his hair very, very nice, and he'd just say he was well groomed and not sloppy. So anyway, we head off, and my recollection is that our first stop was a national park in Texarkana, Arkansas.
It was a fun trip because we were younger, we didn't care about the time or the length of time, and I think it was memorable because of being with kids, my own age, and goofing around. The one thing that sticks out in my mind was when we were driving through Texas, they had a gas war going on. And I remember to this day, a gallon of gas was 22 cents. Yeah, it's just amazing.
For a couple days, anyway. At least till we got to Houston and maybe into Mexico, it was fine. It was mostly about what do you see, casual talk about passing through various countryside. I remember remarking that we went through Houston and they had all this grass that was in Minnesota would be considered weeds. It was like quack grass that stuck with me because one of my other odd jobs, my father started out at one point to work as a landscaper, and so I knew grasses pretty well, and I had been working some summers in addition to other things cutting grass. There's an area of Summit Hill in St. Paul there's still a lot of wealthy people on that street. Anyway, so I would go, or my brother and I would go, and cut grass, trim bushes, shovel snow in the winter, that kind of thing.
And at some point between Chicago and Arkansas, Mr. Gunter starts talking about his background. Prior to that time, I don't know if I had really engaged with him. I mean, we really engaged with his son. I mean, we would arrive and Mr. Gunter was always working. On the trip, I remember he first starts talking about how financially responsible he is. And he would say things like, look at me, I've only been in this country, a short time. And I've been able to save money and buy a brand new car. And it's just a really beautiful car. It's just a brand new. And then he wouldn't leave it at that. Then he'd start putting down your family, saying, your family hasn't been able to save the money and buy a new car, but I work very hard and I'm able to do this.
So we went, and then, it gradually, well, not even gradually. He just started in one day. I think it was mid-morning. I don't know if he's about, America and the problems and, how good Adolf Hitler was.
What do you mean by problems in America?
Well, I don't remember. People were kind of lazy and they didn't work as hard. Look at he's got this, and he's only in the country a couple of years, and he's got a brand new car, and it was that kind of a general look at me, I'm really doing good, and all Americans could do that if they would just work harder like I do. That kind of feeling. But I didn't write down any exact quotes, but
they said maybe like he thought Germans were more industrious. Did your dad have that opinion?
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yes. Oh, yeah.
So he thought Americans were lazy.
Maybe not lazy, but not as industrious as Germans. Yeah. Well, it's like the Germans think of us Austrians. They don't think the Austrians are as industrious as the Germans,
I guess what got to me after another day or so of his, it wasn't continuous, but it was most of the day you were riding in the car, he would make some remarks that, didn't jibe with our reading of history or our upbringing as far as that goes, about the Jews and how good Hitler was. And
here's the thing you got to remember. During Hitler's time, it was an industrial military complex. You got to remember, Germany came out of a recession just like the United States. It was terrible. There, you went to buy a loaf of bread with, hundreds of marks. Unemployment was totally high. And all of a sudden, everybody had a job. Everybody was making good money. So everybody, you know, they thought that it's okay, you know, Hitler.
And then he starts talking about his service in the German army. And I knew that that they originally were from Austria. And I don't have a recollection at this point in my life what he did.
I think maybe my dad must have said something that upset the boys because of, you know, the German army or something. I remember living in Rio, and Father Hagedorn was the priest, the Catholic priest, and he would have picnics outside of Rio. And we would go there, you know, and I remember to this day, I was maybe 12, 13 years old or whatever. They had long benches there, and they would have all kinds of food and lots of beer. And these were all my dad's age, you know, who served in the army there. And I tell you, after a while, they'd be on top of the picnic table, boom, 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 and they would be playing the German army songs, and they would be singing, and it was just like, you know, nothing had ever changed, you know.
Were they just reveling, or did they?
Oh, just reveling, yeah.
They didn't spout out.
No. That they knew they lost the war. I mean, but they kept their you know, their. A Marine is always a Marine. I don't give a shit. But did my dad ever go out and shoot somebody in the back? No. But did my dad say when they killed one of his buddies that if they took 10 people from the village who shot one of his buddies in the back when they came home from a bar, would he have stood up to the lieutenant who shot the 10 people if they didn't tell him who did it? I don't think he would have.
So that's what happened.
That's honest. That's honest. I don't think he would have done that. He wouldn't have intervened if his buddy just got shot in the back by a partisan on the way back to the base from a bar. And the Germans then captured 10 guys and said, okay, we're going to line you all up. You got a chance to tell us who killed one of our soldiers. If you don't, we're going to shoot you all. I don't think my dad would have intervened if he shot them all.
Because
one of his buddies got killed.
Then he started talking about Hitler and Jews, and that really hit a nerve with me because, you know, I love history. In fact, I was thinking at the time of being a history teacher, and I had a very, very influential, probably my favorite teacher was Mr. Tierney at Cretin High School, and, you know, just a real liberal type scholar. And, you know, I knew about the Holocaust. I had watched the evening news with interest ever since I was a little kid. There used to be a program on CBS very similar to 60 Minutes, and I'd watched those horrific videos of the war and the different concentration camps. And all of a sudden this man is saying they should have finished the job, that they didn't kill enough Jews. And, you know, he started talking about, you know, Jews as just, you know, miserable people that should be exterminated.
No, he never supported. I mean, he might have been pro-Hitler, you know, because of the money but I think once he realized what happened in the concentration camp, he changed his mind. I mean, he was still pro-German army. Don't misunderstand me. He thought the German army was, you know, he wasn't with the Gestapo or anything like that, you know. He thought the German army still did a great job. I mean, I don't think most of the people knew actually what Hitler was like. I don't think so.
But I mean, well, they knew about the persecution of the Jews. I mean,
well, I don't think too many people knew about it.
I mean, but there were, you know, incidences like where they broke up shops.
Oh yeah, that's yeah. Well, they were an easy scapegoat, you know. Very easy scapegoat.
And then one day, 3 or 4 days in, or 5 days in, he compared Hitler. He's just like heroes in America, like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. He led us out of trouble and established a good, solid government. And really, I didn't know that. You know, Abraham Lincoln freed slaves. He didn't round them up and try and gas them all. Where's this guy coming from? After that, I just kind of tried to tune him out, and I just didn't. I couldn't. I developed a dislike for him. So, and Gunther never really said anything. Maybe from living with his dad, he learned that he doesn't say anything, or he didn't. You wouldn't know if he agreed or disagreed. He didn't say much. He didn't roll his eyes, or. I mean, one thing I remember is that he didn't really say anything to us, like, sorry about my old man, or, it just didn't. It seemed like he was, maybe he was afraid, maybe he didn't care. He's used to his old man ranting and raving. I don't know. That's when I think Ray and I started talking about leaving.
And, what do? You're sitting in the back seat of a car, and you're listening to this, and he's in the driver's seat. And then all of a sudden, we stop for the night. And we're kids. And you set your tent up, and you're running through the park, and we used to run a lot. I mean, don't ask me, but when we were with Gunther, we ran a lot, and we explored, and, you're a kid, right? So, then the conversation about the Jews stopped, and, then you're at it again.
I think once he got comfortable with us in his car, he decided he had a captive audience, but that was my feeling. He didn't have anything that was specifically prompting him to do it other than, these guys are riding with me, and I guess I'm going to set them straight. That's what I think.
He spouted off the entire trip. I mean, he would always bring it up. And I think we got to the point that we would just ignore him. Knowing my temperament and how I am, I'm sort of, a political individual. I'm a survivor. Yeah, yeah. And I was trying to be polite to Mr. Gunther, but I know that I was saying things against what he believed in. I mean, he was talking about the extermination of the Jews, that the job should be completed, and it was just so horribly wrong and against all your morality and all your values and everything you've ever learned. But then you realize, my God, you're talking to a Nazi. And so very soon, by the time we got to Texarkana, we knew that the driver, Mr. Meisner, was a Nazi.
That I do not remember. To be honest, I don't remember that for some reason.
Is it something you just don't want to remember, or or?
I don't know. If I would remember, I would remember, but I just don't. I don't remember that part.
Did you ever have like a disagreement with your father over certain things, or?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he was old school. I mean, it's.
A different time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we really felt, in my heart, we thought that Gunther was a good guy, and that, he had to live with us. I sort of remember him being just sort of ambivalent. I mean, I guess we were ambivalent. I mean, we were on a vacation, and it's something that we didn't want to hear, but we had to hear it anyway. And actually, I just thought of this. When we were in Texarkana, we get back in the car, Chuck and I were Catholic. We were a lot more Catholic, and he wasn't. We thought Gunter was a Catholic, but we were so regimented at that time that we had to go to church on Sunday. And so after we left that campground, we asked Mr. Meisner to drop us off at a church.
My family was never really religious. I mean, we would go to Christmas, Easter, go to church at Easter and Christmas, and that was it, you know.
So what was important in your family?
Leading a good life. I think that's, more than anything else, it's not, not committing any crime or trespasses against somebody. Ours was like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Not because of any religious, because that's just a natural law that we, my dad did not believe in Catholicism, because he always told me, religion is the opium of the people.
Yeah, that's a communist.
Yeah, and he was not a communist, definitely not, because he hated communists. Okay. And that was part of his legacy, from Germany,
So he drops us off at what he thinks is a Catholic church. And it's sort of out in the country. We're driving along, and he sees this church, and he pulls in, and he says, okay, I'll be back to pick you up in an hour. And so we hop out of the car, and we enter the church, and it was an all-black church. It was really like a holy roller church, right? And so you got two white guys standing in the back, and we're the only white guys. And the minister came off the altar and came down and walked us up to the front and sat us down and told us that we were welcome. And, we're saying, holy mackerel, what's going on here, And, but we stayed for the service, and it was wonderful. It was, really rockin', singing music.
Yeah, see, I remember the guy saw us, but I didn't think we were in Texas that long. I don't remember, that part is fuzzy. I think he's right about the black guy being nice to us, but going into the church or anything like that, I don't remember.
And they were so friendly and sweet to us. We finished the service, and you go outside, and there's Mr. Gunter, and we get in our car, and we continue on our way. So we're in Arkansas, and then we headed to Beaumont, Texas, because I had my Uncle Nino de Prima. I hadn't seen my Uncle Nino since I was a kid. He was supposed to be a Catholic priest, and my grandfather had sent him off to an Alabama seminary, and he ends up being a Baptist minister in Beaumont, and a shoe repairman too. So we stayed with him. I don't know if it was for a day or two. Then he took us to Galveston, and that was the first time that I recalled ever going to the ocean. But Gunter and Mr. Meisner, and we all went down there, and then from Galveston, we went to Laredo. So we're off to Laredo, and that's where we entered the country, Mexico. And I don't really recall much about it, other than all of a sudden you realize, my God, there's something different about this country. And you stop to go to a toilet, and oh my God, at the gas station. I remember the first gas station we stopped at, the toilets were absolutely full of shit. Just full. So you start seeing some poverty, but nothing like it would be in, say, Mexico City as we approached. And we then headed to Monterey.
No, we didn't stay in America more than 1 or 2 nights. Then we crossed into Mexico and drove down to Monterey.
When we crossed into Mexico, of course, the highways down there were like washboards. They weren't as smooth as here. But the scenery was so fantastic for all of us, we enjoyed it.
We get to Monterey, and we check into a hotel, and hotels were so cheap back then. I'll never forget, we checked into La Favorita hotel. And it didn't cost us much, 25 cents or 50 cents, but it was like a 5 or 6 story hotel. So Chuck and I are in a room, and then Gunther and Mr. Meisner. And then Chuck and I said, hey, let's go out and take a walk and see what's going on. And I know it was probably approaching, 8 or 9 o'clock, so we get out and, we're hardly even leaving the hotel, and a cab is there, and I'll never forget it. It was a Model A. It was a 1929 Model A, just like mine. And this guy speaks English, and so he says, hello boys, how are you? You looking for a good time? And we said, no, we're not looking for a good time. And he says, oh, come on, you're in Mexico, man. He says, you need a good time. Look at you, how old are you, And we're 15. He says, what you need is a good virgin. And so we're thinking, yeah, we've never had sex. Having a good virgin would really be good. Well, how much is it going to cost us, And he says, $2. And so Chuck and I look at each other and we say, we're hormonal, we're 15 years old, and we've never had sex before, and you're a Catholic, and if you have an impure thought, it's a mortal sin, and you're going to go to hell, right? And so he said, okay. We get in his cab, and the guy says, I take you to a nice place. He says, you won't be disappointed. Real virgin. And so we get to this place, and it's a whorehouse, right? And you're a little kid, and you go in there, and all these adults are in there, and they're having a great time. And this guy he escorts us to the table, and he orders us 2 shots of tequila. And I've never had alcohol in my life, and I take a little sip of this tequila, and it's like burns your tongue, and it's, oh man, this is something else. So, people were groping each other and feeling each other up and all sorts of things. For a kid my age, it was really something better than a movie.
Who was a big movie star back then?
Oh, back in those days, oh God, Elizabeth Taylor. She was a knockout, for me anyway. I thought she was, at the time, she was probably the most beautiful woman in the world, or considered, so. I remember walking up the stairs, so this guy says, okay, you give me your $2, and you go upstairs. And the door opens, and there lies this lovely, lovely girl. She's my age. She really is a young girl, and beautiful black hair, and, she's naked. And then this, it almost stopped me. She had a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and there was a little candle, right by the Virgin Mary. So anyway, you're ready to go, and 2 strokes later you're finished, and then you say to yourself, you have just horrible buyer's remorse, and you say, what have I done? Back in those days, all kids carried a rubber. Yeah, in anticipation. Really? In fact, I even had I had a beautiful girlfriend and never had sex with her, and the rubber would actually make a little round spot in your wallet. So, you'd put the rubber in your wallet. And you'd sit on it enough that, my wallet, I could see the little round thing. But here, what an idiot, I didn't even put it on. And so you've had sex with what's supposed to be a virgin. And she was a young girl, that's for sure. And then you leave, right? And so we finish up and we get back in our cab, and Chuck and we're going through hell. And he's got buyer's remorse too. And by the time we get back to the hotel, we're saying, what did we do? God, we're going to get syphilis. We're going to go blind. We're going to get gonorrhea. We're going to die. And where's a Catholic priest that speaks English so that we can go to confession? No, I'm serious. That's how naive we were. Instead of saying, wow, a modern kid today would probably enjoy probably started having sex when he was 12, but we were 15 going on 16. And we were just, we were really sad and embarrassed that we had lost our virginity and lost our morality, and that we're better than that, right?
But Ray said you visited some places.
We did. But I don't want to go into that.
Into confession.
Yeah. Just as soon stay out of the confessional. But we were not perfect boys, but we were kind of dumb, naive boys, yeah.
But Ray said he had a rubber that he kept in his wallet. Did you carry one of those around too, or no?
No, he was more advanced than I, or whatever you want to call it. He was also more of a ladies' man than I. So
you were carrying around this rubber like for years, and you never used it, huh?
Yeah, and then in the excitement of the moment, I didn't even think about putting it on. I mean, because, well, my gosh, I guess I was totally, I'm young and embarrassed, and didn't know what to do with sex or anything. And I don't think this girl did either. I think she felt pretty bad. I don't even recall kissing this girl. I think I wanted to or something, but then it was just, you realize, gosh, I'm hiring her, and she just wants it over, and she's got the Blessed Virgin Mary, and I know Chuck felt the same way, because, I think I came down the stairs first, and then he came down. He was up there too, seeing another girl, and we come down and we look at each other and we say, what the hell have we done? And we're in our cab and we're going back to the Favorita Hotel.
Actually, I was there with them. Yeah. But I was too reluctant. I was in the room with the girl. Yeah. I lied to the boys. Say, how was it? I said, oh, it was great, Yeah. Yeah. But the one thing I do not remember, whether we actually paid for it. I have a vague memory because we had timed ourselves. Because I remember looking at my watch and saying, I gotta go now. And I think all of us, bolted out of the room we were at, ran downstairs, jumped in the car, and took off. Okay. That's the one thing I do remember, because I was scared stiff. Because... No pun intended, but...
right. Ray described it as, feeling Catholic guilt.
No. Catholicism had nothing to do with it. No.
So we get up in the morning, you have breakfast, and you get in the car and you're off. And then my next recollection is that we went to a city called San Luis Potosí.
Then we went around and we went to some small town important in Mexican history, and I think it was Maximilian, the Emperor of Mexico or something, got killed by some rebels.
And I'm sure that Mr. Meisner, he's the guy who planned the trip. We didn't have much input. He knew where he was going. And this city is more or less a tribute to an Austrian Archduke named Maximilian, who became the Emperor of Mexico in 1864. Apparently, France had not been paid certain debts, and they occupied Mexico at the time, and they put him on the throne as the Emperor of Mexico. He was actually killed. He was by a firing squad in 1867. He was a liberal guy that tried to do good things for the Mexican peasants. I think it was...
it made an impression on you?
Yeah, it did.
Because you mentioned it.
Well, because, number one, I was interested in history, and I was just starting to understand, manifest destiny. And when Chuck and I were in 3rd or 4th grade, hell, we had Davy Crockett hats, you know, with a coon tail, because Davy Crockett had fought at the Alamo and beaten Santa Anna. I mean, that was a big deal growing up, you know, that we had won and that we had taken, you know, Texas and California and all the west from Mexico. And so now, you know, I'm in Mexico, and all of a sudden I realize, well, who is this Maximilian? What happened? And so, yeah, that was sort of fascinating to see.
This is all Gunther's dad's ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that he had selected this whole thing with Maximilian for a purpose, because that was, I mean, I don't recall him pontificating about Maximilian or anything.
Yeah, my dad was self-educated. You know, he taught himself French, and he would read in French, original, you know, Voltaire and all those, you know. So he read a lot of history. I mean, he and I would have a lot of arguments about, you know, how the world changes, you know, and.
For example?
Well, I challenged him on World War II and the history and so forth, you know. And he said, you know, well, you had to be there, you know, you had to be in the German army, you know.
So, like, for example, I mean, challenged about what aspect? I mean,
about taking over other countries. And he always told me, he says, remember, Gunther, the victor writes the history. You know.
But I know that, you know, he continued, you know, his conversations, you know, about the Nazis.
Was there any reason for all his hate, or he just?
Well, I think that he was simply telling you who he was. I mean, he was a former German soldier that lost a war that he thought was justified, and they thought that they were doing the right thing.
You know, it's us and them and that kind of stuff. If America wasn't here with Americans, then where in the hell would you have come from once you left Brazil? How would you find a place where you could work hard and buy a nice car? You know, it was nonsense, even to a 15-year-old, but you get tired of hearing it. You know, and once he started, he just always was talking that way. You know, he might talk about scenery or something, but then he goes right back to that subject, as I remember. And that's what got to us. It was just too much. Then we drove through Mexico City. I don't know what sequence.
We get in the car, you know, we head off for Mexico City, and you just could not believe it. When you start to enter Mexico City back in 1961, I bet it was 20, 30 miles of cardboard shacks. I mean, just mile after mile after mile of just abject poverty. I mean, stuff I had never seen in my life. And, you know, people, dusty, you know, desert-like conditions, and, you know, walking on the road, and, I mean, just mass population. And, you know, it really hits you that, boy, Mexico's in a tough state. And, you know, I really don't remember much. I know we stopped at a few monuments in Mexico City, but I don't remember the names. And I know that they were very beautiful, very tall, you know, I mean, very European.
Yes.
That, but there again, we were just doing sort of cursory sightseeing and seeing different, you know, different plazas and different churches and, you know, different statues.
We went to Mexico City, and then from Mexico City, we went to a town called Puebla. And unfortunately, either the water or the food that we drank gave us Montezuma's revenge, and we had the runs and we were staying at this hotel, and we had one big room, tall ceiling, but no washroom. in the room. We had to go to the washroom in the hall. And I remember all of us had 1 or 2 rolls of toilet paper, and it was just one guy going, one guy coming, one guy going back. I mean, I'll never forget how miserable all, 4 of us were.
I don't recall staying in Mexico City. I think that it was so huge that we left immediately, and we could have gone to a smaller city and got a hotel or something, but my next recollection would be going to Puebla. And in Puebla, we specifically went there to climb this mountain. There was a mountain called Popocatépetl, and it was supposed to be one of the highest points in Mexico. I mean, it was snow-capped and beautiful.
And then we went to the Valley of the Sleeping Woman, where they had these 2 huge 17,000-foot volcanoes that stood up off of this plain. And they were, it was shaped like a woman's breast, and so they called it the Valley of the Sleeping Woman, because there were two breasts sticking up out of the valley floor. And I remember that well. We stayed at this place. It was like a hostel almost, but there was nobody working it. We came in kind of late in the afternoon, and we put on all our clothes, and we went to hike up Popocatépetl.
But one of the interesting things that we did, we drove to Mount Popocatépetl, which is actually a volcano. And the volcano had been inactive for close to 100 years. And my dad actually drove, as if we had an SUV, up this road, up the mountain, and up the volcano. And we ended up at what they call refugio, which is nothing but a stone building, and it had cots there with straw. And that's where we spent the night. And the next day, Chuck, Ray, and I started to hike up on the snow to the top.
So we get out there and actually had a great time. And I don't remember, I don't know if Mr. Gunter went hiking in the mountains by himself, but Gunter and Chuck and I went mountain climbing. And the night before the mountain climbing, we stayed at a lodge. We had hiked halfway up the mountain, and the Mexican government, and it was a national park, they had like a cabin up there. And we stayed at this cabin and had some food and prepared ourselves for this hike as far as we could go up the next day.
And we thought it would really be cool. Well, we were kind of freezing after about 45 minutes. And some Mexican climbers come down, and they had all kinds of ropes, pitons, and they looked at us and they said, "Oh, here, if you're going up, you must use some of our equipment." We didn't know how to use a lot of it, and so we just thanked them, and then it started to snow and sleet, and
it was July. Actually, I know it was July 14th when we climbed this mountain. And we started it and got caught in a snowstorm. And God, we thought we were gonna die. And I had an old army blanket that I wrapped around my shoulders and a sweater, and we tied towels around our head. I mean, we had no idea that this weather would turn so much. And it really was, it was sort of scary. You're up there and all of a sudden it's, you go from 80 or 100 degrees and pretty soon it's 30 degrees or 20 degrees and snow is blowing like hell. And I mean, it seemed like for an hour or so you were in like a blizzard.
We never did make it to the top. It was pretty cold and the altitude was pretty, I mean, we stepped about maybe 20 feet and had to stop and, and we all had towels on our heads, to cover our ears. But it was just an unbelievable, trip.
it was kind of a cool experience, to be walking in snow in the middle of, in the middle of the summer in a and basically what we kind of looked on as a tropical country, you know. I suppose we were up maybe 10,000 feet or something. We didn't get anywhere near the top, and it wasn't easy. There was a lot of fine ash and volcanic dust and stuff, and so it was a steep climb, but it wasn't a difficult, dangerous. You didn't have to rappel or anything like that. So,
as a matter of fact, we thought we were really smart and start to slide down. And I remember having my dad's camera, and I started to slide. I'm trying to stop myself, and I always carried a knife with me. And I remember I just went and stuck the knife in the snow, trying to slow myself down. And we all slowed down. We didn't go anywhere, but that was an eye-opener. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it just went away. And then we took pictures, and we didn't go all the way up. I think we were exhausted. Then we came back down.
We kind of turned around and headed back. No worse for wear, but it was, you realize that, yeah, I guess this is pretty cold up here. And we slept as I recall, we slept in a room with, I think it had 2 double bunk, it just had springs that you could have brought mats, and we just slept on them, and a lot of time we went out and sat by the fire because I tried to warm up. It was pretty cold.
Yeah, so that was an interesting experience in itself,
Was there anybody in the refuge?
No, we were the only ones up there that time. Yeah.
Well, no, there were some Mexican people, and then those climbers came back, but they didn't stay at this rustic place we were at. So.
Well, what's your best memory of that time? I mean, for your favorite?
I think when we were actually climbing up the mountain, just before it started to snow, and we were laughing and we were having a good time, and the 3 of us were together, and that was one of the best, most memorable. I still remember them people looking appalled when, what? Where are you going? No, you can't go up. No, you must use some of our equipment.
Oh, we had fun. Probably talked a lot, goofed around. Yeah.
It was a really wonderful time, and we really enjoyed that with Gunter.
And then from there, like I said, we went to Puebla, and then from Puebla, we drove to Veracruz.
Well, from the mountain, we ended up in Veracruz. And I know that by the time we got to Veracruz, that we were sort of, reaching our limit with Mr. Meisner.
I forget, he was on a rampage or, preaching again, and we just said, we've had enough of this. We're going to leave and go on our own. We'll get back home on our own.
I mean, instead of just being quiet, he was picking up the pace. It was almost unbearable, just listening to him, that we wanted to escape.
And again, Gunther never, to me anyway, he never said anything. Oh, no, don't leave. My old dad doesn't mean it. He did nothing, like no excuses, no nothing, no acknowledgement. At least not to me. Maybe he did to Ray.
Just goodbye and that's it.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
You don't?
For some reason, I do not remember that.
Okay. They said it was like before Veracruz or at Veracruz?
That I do not remember. To be honest, I don't remember that for some reason.
But we did see him again, and we did do a couple of things with him, if I'm remembering correctly, but that was pretty much it. And then we went to Veracruz. I believe we took the bus to Veracruz, but Gunther and his father ended up in Veracruz also. Of course, it was a good-sized city on the Gulf of Mexico.
So So you split up before Veracruz?
Well, that's my recollection, or just the night before we got to Veracruz, we split up. I thought we took a bus, but Ray doesn't remember it that way.
Did you see them in Veracruz?
Yeah. Well, not the old man. We saw Gunter. I think that was the last place we saw him.
What was he doing?
No, he come to see us, it seemed like. He didn't hang around or come to the tent or anything. I forget where we were. We were close to the water. And he came walking up, I believe. But it's a little fuzzy. But I remember that we saw him there. It wasn't important to me. I wasn't angry with him, but I was disappointed that he didn't say something, to us when we couldn't take what his father was saying all the time. But he didn't. And like I say, maybe he was to live with his father. You kept your mouth shut. I don't know. That could very well be.
And there, Chuck, I, and Ray, we rented, there was a guy who had a boat who said he's going to take us out fishing, And
then Ray says we went fishing, and that he thought Gunter was along at Veracruz. We did go fishing on the Gulf, but what I remembered was that we had left Veracruz and went to a little further north to a town called Tampico, and that's where we fished from. But it doesn't make a lot of difference. It was one of those towns or cities on the Gulf side.
So we got to Veracruz, and we went fishing, deep sea fishing. And some old Mexican guy in a beat-out boat with an old, like a Model A engine inside it, it took us way out.
He tried to explain what was happening with the port and stuff like that. I think it was the grain was coming in, or rice. It was a sizable agricultural port.
Veracruz.
This is 1961. So Tampico was also a port of some sort, but I don't know how important or unimportant it was. So
actually, Chuck and Ray paid for the trip. I said, look, I'll go with you, but I'm not paying for fishing. I can fish anyway. Long story short, we were out there for at least about an hour and a half, and the boys were going back and forth and so forth, And the one thing is, we were able to buy beer. So the boys were drinking beer and I was drinking beer, and I can't remember if it was Chuck or Ray said, I just want to relax. You want to fish, hold the pole? And not more than 5 minutes after I took the pole, I got a hit. And I thought I had a whale on the other end. That's how it ended up to be a bonita about this big, but it fought like a whale.
And by God, we thought we had caught a shark. And Chuck claims it was something called the bonita, but it was a real big old round-headed fish. And it seemed like it took forever to haul that fish in. But we hauled the old fish in, and the fisherman kept it and cooked it for his family. And I took a couple of photographs.
Yeah, we actually brought it back, and the guy took it to a restaurant, and they served us. Yeah.
They cooked it up for you.
Yeah.
How did they prepare it?
They just did it whole on a grill. Yeah. The head, everything, I mean, they just gutted it and just threw it out. They took the scales off, and that was it. Yeah. And then from Veracruz, we went up to Tampico, and then from Tampico back into the United States and back home.
Now, according to Ray and Chuck, you guys split up at one point. You parted ways because of your dad or something?
I don't remember that part.
And my recollection is that after we finished that little fishing trip, we had some kind of a blow-up with Mr. Meisner, and we just couldn't take it. And we said goodbye to him. Says, hey, thank you so much. And we didn't have a big fight or anything. We just said, hey, we can't take this anymore. We're leaving. We'll make sure we'll get back by yourself. And we left. And so we're in Veracruz, and we said, well, where are we going to go? Our money was, we still had some money. We had been gone, I bet 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, maybe pushing 4. And we said, hey, let's just go camp on the beach, and we'll just stay on the beach for a while. There's a big fort in Veracruz, and there were plaques and what have you that talked about the American Army invading Mexico in 1846. And so we were right down, we could see the fort from where we were camping. And we had a tent and some sleeping bags. And believe it or not, my friend Chuck had a gun. He had a .22 Luger that one of his relatives had brought back from World War II. For whatever reason, he brought that along, for protection or something.
It was just a .22, automatic. Just looked like, the TV Luger. Yeah, there was a lot of interest in that, but nobody, bothered it. It was just a couple of guys wanted to buy it. And when I crossed into Mexico, no one said a word about the pistol. Nobody. But that was, and when I think of it now, it's like, God, that is really weird. They let you, 15-year-old kid bring it's just a .22, but it's an automatic pistol, like 8 shots or something. And
what did you do with it in Mexico? Did you use it at all, or no?
A couple of times I target practiced it, and then one guy asked if he could shoot it. And so I let him, shoot a few rounds. But Ray never I don't think he liked me having the gun. But I don't know. He never said anything. And I'm not sure why I took it. I think I took it for protection. But to be honest with you, I don't know.
What did you think of Chuck's Luger? His gun.
Did he have it with him in Mexico?
Yeah.
That I honestly do not remember him having a firearm.
So we get our tent up, and Chuck's got his gun out, and we're just 2 teenagers, and by God, at night he would take practice shots with his gun, shooting at different posts and things. And there was this big hacienda, big old house, not too far from our tent, and it had a huge adobe wall, and it had broken bottles all the way around it. And so, well, this looks like a good place to get some water. You got to drink water, right? And so we go and we knock on the door, and it turns out it's a place run by this guy, Guardo. And Guardo he owns a whorehouse. And so our tent is right in front of a Mexican whorehouse, and we don't even know it. I've got a picture of him, because we had our tent and he'd come down and see us. And he sort of looked like Clark Gable. He was a real handsome guy, and he had a Mexican hat on, and for some reason, he just got a big kick out of us. And we were young guys, and he got a chance to speak English a little bit. And
Eduardo, yeah, I didn't know him well. He hung around. He kind of liked us American kids. I don't know. Ray, I think, remembers more about him than I do. I really don't remember much about Eduardo, although except he kind of hung around and was pleasant.
And so he says, hello boys, how are you? And he knows that we're Yankees and we're good kids, and he says, hey, I want to read English. He says, will you guys teach me some English? And by the way, this is a whorehouse, and if you want some women, I've got women for you, And we walk in there and we look around, and I'll never forget it. I'd never seen anyone screwing a woman before in public, and some guy's got some girl pinned up against a wall and she's totally naked and he's banging the shit out of her. I'm saying, holy God. So we said, no, we're not interested in that because we're still going through buyer's remorse. We just want water. And he says, okay, boys. Then he gives us water, right? And we were there for several days, and so we would go and get water. And he had a big boat. He had a big ocean-going boat. He says, I'm going fishing today. Why don't you boys come with me? So we get out on the ocean, and he's got employees and what have you, and he's going to go fishing. And he says, I'm looking for a school of fish, boys. And his guys, they spot a school of fish, and pretty soon he's throwing dynamite out in the water. So he throws that dynamite, and it blows up, and pretty soon all these fish are floating, and his guys are netting all these fish. And that was fishing with Guardo.
Well, see, now, I think the guy just showed us. And Ray says, no, he threw dynamite out. Okay, I don't remember that. I think I would remember it, but if Ray remembers it, it could very well have happened. So, but that's one I don't remember.
And I know that we were on the beach on a Sunday because there again, our Catholicism kicked in, and we had to go to church. So we head off to church, and my recollection is that after church, people would see your English and what have you. They were very friendly, and people always want to practice their English, and you're trying to practice your Spanish, and so we socialized a little bit, and then we would eat, and we'd go back to our tent.
I did go to a church. And I'm not sure, I believe Ray came with me while we were down there, but I don't remember. I remember the column and the kind of a sidewalky area, which was very, European and nice. I think there was a small square in front of where the church was. The columns were like where people would walk, promenade, It's a little bit like, if you can remember, in like New Orleans, where they have the wrought iron and they got like balconies over the sidewalks, and this was nice, stone arches with. I don't know. It's fuzzy from there. I hesitate to say. I don't know.
And about that time, Montezuma's revenge set in, and we were really sick. We would go to markets. After we left Gunter, I mean, we were on our own. And, we were eating fruits and vegetables and just, going where low-income people would go to eat.
There, and we stayed in Veracruz. We had, we started to feel better from, we lost our diarrhea or Montezuma's revenge pretty well. Because I remember going to we were getting low on money, but we went to a restaurant. And I got some arroz con pollo, rice and chicken, and that stayed down well. That's why I remember.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have a lot of money, so we were eating cheap. Probably a lot of rice and beans and things, but I don't remember ever buying bottled water. So probably the water that we were having, I don't even think they sold bottled water back then. I can remember having Cokes or Pepsi or things like that. But we both got really sick, and we're on the beach and we're going to the bathroom all the time, and for the most part, you're jumping in the ocean and washing yourself off, and we just felt horrible. We lost a lot of weight. So we're shrinking. I think by the time I got back, I weighed either 110 or 115 pounds, and I was 5'10". Chuck lost a lot of weight. And so we hit the road. We packed up and said goodbye to Guardo, and when we left Veracruz, we hopped on these old Ford buses. I think that what happened is they'd take all the old Ford yellow buses in America, and they'd sell them to Mexico. And then they would put these roof racks on them. We'd get on the bus, and there would be all these peasants with their chickens and pigs and pigeons and everything. And the whole top would be full of junk. I bet we went up the coast at about 25, 30 miles an hour. all the way to Brownsville that way. But we were still sick, very sick. And I remember that when we got to Tampico, we had to rest for a couple of days. I remember Chuck had run out of money. And I had he was supposed to bring $125 and he only brought 100. So we were getting down. I think I had $25 more, so we had to sort of ration our money out, right? And I still remember we had eating a ham sandwich on white bread that tasted like heaven at this hotel in Tampico, and our stomach just settling down a little bit, you know. And so after we rested there and just really recuperated, we just continued up the coast very slowly, and I'm sure it took us, you know, several days.
And then it wasn't too long, you know, we had enough for bus tickets to go up to Brownsville, Texas. That's a border crossing. And that's where a strange adventure happened. Ray probably told you, but...
So we go through the border check people, the customs people, and the Mexican guys. They took Chuck's tequila bottle away. They weren't interested in his gun. You know, they pulled out his gun and everything, and they said, "Kid, how old are you?" And he says, "I'm 15." And he says, "Well, you can't bring this into America." And they poured it out right there in front of him.
And when I crossed into Mexico, no one said a word about the pistol. Nobody. However, when I come back, tried to get back into the United States, they looked at it kind of funny, but then oh, what is this? And then they're looking at a bottle of tequila, and I was, you know, I wasn't quite 16, and I was taking it home for my dad. Well, they said, "Well, it's not, I won't open it. I'm not going to drink it. It's not for me." No, they took it and smashed it in a barrel.
And they gave him his gun, and we picked up our backpacks and our tent and everything, and we walked across the border, and we went right to the highway, the continuing highway, and stuck out our thumb, and we weren't there for 5 minutes, and this 61 Ford Falcon comes along. And this guy, it's just a guy probably about 30, 35 years old. And so he looks at me and he says, "Hey, you guys know how to drive a stick?" And I says, "Yeah, I know how to drive a stick." And he says, "Good." He says, "I'm going to get in the back seat and fall asleep. I'm going to give you some money and a map to Chattanooga." He says, "I've been in a Mexican whorehouse for a week." And he says, "You guys just get in the car and drive." And
you know, we didn't have money for any more bus money once we got to the U.S., where the buses were more expensive. So we were hitchhiking, and this guy in a kind of a rundown Ford Falcon, you know, and he stopped, picked us up, and he said, "Would you guys drive?" "Oh yeah. "Oh, can you drive a stick though?" "Oh yeah, we both can." He said, "Oh, good, because, you know, I'm in a Mexican whorehouse and I am just beat, and can you guys take turns driving and let me sleep in the back seat?" And we said, "Sure." And so he, without any hesitation, just crawled in the back seat and was, within 5 minutes, he was sound asleep. Then when we were running low on gas, we woke him up and said, "We don't really have any money for gas." And he'd give us some money, but he never got out of the back seat. He'd just go back to sleep.
So Chuck and I, we get in the front seat, and we take off. And that guy got in the back seat, and he just fell asleep. He was exhausted. I mean, my recollection is he slept for like 8 hours and didn't even wake up. And so we're tooling along, and God, I think we were out of Texas by the time the guy woke up, you know. Anyway, we headed, when he woke up, you know, we told him that we were on our way to Rome, Georgia, because, you know, we were running out of money. So my plan was we would go to Rome, and my grandfather I had a good relationship with him, and he was a businessman, and I knew that he would give me some money, and we could probably just take a bus back. And so this guy wakes up and he starts telling us all about his stories. And man, he was a salesman, and his hobby was going to a Mexican whorehouse for his vacation. And so he regaled us with all these stories of his vacation and what he had done. And we laughed, and he bought us food. And
So we'd pull in and we went, like 1,000 miles, or maybe it was 1,200, to, Rome, Georgia, which was north of Atlanta, where Ray had relatives, including his grandmother, who took us in and fed us good Southern home cooking, and we were feeling much better about that time.
we got to Rome, Georgia at 5 o'clock in the morning. My recollection is that we drove straight through. And we get to Rome, and my grandfather had built this old brick house, really cool old house. He actually had a mason from Sicily come over and finish the front porch, and had a huge flagstone front porch with these concrete porticos. And my grandmother would always get up in the morning, hose it down and sweep it. And she was hosing it down and sweeping it the sun was coming up. And she's a great cook. And so we pull in and I say, "Hey, Grandma." And she says, "You boys look hungry." And she says, "I'm going to fix you some bacon and grits and biscuits, and I'm going to feed you good." And so we went in with that guy. He came in the house with us, and we had a great breakfast. And he got in his car and went on his way. Really, that was probably the end of the exciting part of our trip, because we spent a few days in Georgia saying hello to my cousins, my grandfather, and then we took a bus back to St. Paul.
And that's kind of, in a nutshell, that's kind of our Mexican adventure.
Did you see Gunther after that, or no?
I saw him once. And a year later, I had broken up with my girlfriend, or she had broken up with me. She met another guy, right? And I was brokenhearted, just brokenhearted. She's such a sweet girl. And so anyway, you're young and stupid. And I had this really nice car. I had a 1956 Chevy Bel Air with a Corvette motor and everything in it. And I drove to Chicago one night. What does a teenager do when they break up with their girlfriend? And so there I go, off to Chicago. And I had Gunter's number, and I call him up. And I remember going to his high school. And so I know he had just finished the day in high school, and I met him and picked him up, and we went and had a Coke or something, and we talked for a couple of hours. To me, it was just like the old Gunter. Hey, how are you? We were good friends, and I had this hot car, and but I have no recollection of ever talking to him about his dad or what happened. And after that, I haven't spoken to him until just last week. Right. So it's been quite a few years. So that would have been I talked to him in 1962. I mean, we had really good times with Gunter in 7th and 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, and and we had some good times with him, even with his dad in the car. It's just that he hit a button with us, and we couldn't. We just said, "Hey, we don't want to be with this man anymore."
I was just thinking about it. Maybe the reason I don't remember about the split up that much is because it was rather very painful to me, and I think I tried to block that out.
Yeah, for them it was really big, for Ray and Chuck. I mean, it was a big thing for them. Especially, I think, Chuck maybe, even more so, yeah. So they wondered why you didn't say anything at the time. they were wondering what your feelings were at that time, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you didn't know what to say, or you just were going along with it and keeping your mouth shut, but they didn't know.
Yeah, I probably was very hurt.
Yeah, did you feel like were standing in between your father and other people, or?
Well, I must have, because I can't think of it right now, how I felt then. I can only imagine. Even now, I don't know what I would have said to my dad. I mean, if you were in my shoe, what would you have said? Well, like I say, I didn't start contradicting my parents until I didn't have to contradict my mom until I was in college. That's when my dad and I, locked horns. All I can say is I enjoyed the trip. I enjoyed being down there with my friends, What happened after a breakup, like I said, I must have blocked that part out, because I probably felt so bad that I didn't want to think about it. Because until you brought it up, I had never thought about it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it'd be a tough thing to handle, especially.
Yeah.
So, especially with your father there, and.
Yeah. But I don't know. I definitely will have a conversation with Ray and Chuck when I get together with them, to get their side of the story, Yeah, I'll have to ask them, how would they have felt if the parts were reversed?
Right.
Imagine you were in my shoes, or whatever, How would you have felt?
Yeah, I don't know. Depends on the person, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And life is not black and white. Are there things I wish I could have done differently? Of course, We all have, But overall, I'm, like I say, I am sorry about what happened on the trip, Like I said, I don't recall all the details or anything. And the only thing I can say, I must have been very hurt to block it out. Would I have done it differently? I don't know. I was a young kid then.
Anything else you want to add about?
No, Adam, no. Thanks for doing this. I've said enough.
Yeah.
I've said enough. Well, yeah, you had time with Ray to get more ideas on what to ask.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm asking you to back him up. See if he's telling the truth. Does he talk?
The truth as I know it,
He doesn't tell tall tales, does he?
Well, because the truth's based on memories is, I can tell you from experience, it can be faulty. You can remember things vividly, and then, you come back at pictures or something and you say, God dang it, why did I always think that this was like that when it wasn't? It was really like that.
Right.
That, I think, is normal. What do they call it? There's a psychological term for it, but it's basically you're dressing up your dreams to kind of reinforce your experiences in life. And so if there's a choice, you take the one that's closer to your choice in life, and that may not be correct.
Did you go back and see Ray later? I mean, not Ray, Gunther. Did you go back?
No, I did not.
You did.
I did not. Apparently, Ray has gotten a hold of Gunther at this late stage, but I'm not excited about that. Ray was kind of excited about it. I have no desire to revive any kind of friendship with Gunther at this late state. He could have said something himself when we said we can't take this anymore, and he didn't, and he never wrote or anything, and so as far as I was concerned, the friendship was pretty much over. So yeah, and he lived down in Chicago, and there was no way I'd go and stay at his house like we did prior to that, after experiencing his father's true philosophical view on life. Kill him! So.
I mean, have your philosophies changed over the years then?
Well, I don't know. Of course, everyone, well, if everyone doesn't, everyone should evolve a little bit over the years as they learn more and take in more, unless they have it absolutely down pat in the beginning, and then they should change their outlook of life. Yeah, I believe like Christianity is really a great code to live by, but an emphasis on Christian. There's not enough emphasis in my book on what Christ taught, about the whole idea about a new covenant and how important love is. And, these people that they get hung up on some of this Old Testament stuff where they had this real mean old bastard for God. I don't understand, except that's, was introduced in a civilization that's kind of tribal, male-centric, and is kind of rough. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, lots of that kind of stuff. Well, Christ never talked about, judge not lest you be judged, all kinds of things that you can piece together. And so yes, I don't go to church at this moment, but I often think about it, and God is hard to believe in, but I still have some hope. So that's all changed. I used to, go regularly to church and not really think about it too much, but that's changed. But other things too, but I won't pontificate too much.
Where does that hate come from, like Mr. Meisner?
I think it comes from what early humans in tribal clans, families used to try and protect themselves, that they had to be better and that they had to be suspicious of other people, and so I think that was an outcome of survival, is what I think. And then, but we can change now, but we don't seem to.
Right.
It's funny. Humans are very slow to learn as a group. Fact is, I don't know. You can't really call us a group, can you? There's so many different factions.